The first thing you notice, coming back to yourself this evening, is the smell. Dried chamomile, beeswax, the faint, sweet ghost of something that was simmering earlier. Valerian root, you think, and something else beneath it, something almost like warm hay, or the inside of an old wooden chest left in the sun. The smell of the shop has settled into the walls over the years, into the wood of the counter and the cloth of your apron, and it is so familiar that sometimes you stop noticing it entirely. But tonight you notice it. Tonight it finds you first, before the warmth does, before the soft amber light of the candles does, and it is like a hand placed gently between your shoulder blades. Steady. Here. You are here. The shop on Sable Street is exactly as you left it this morning. The shelves run floor to ceiling along the eastern wall, filled with bottles in amber and green and a deep, old blue that has no particular name. Each one is stoppered carefully. Each one has a label in your handwriting, small, unhurried letters that took you years to get right. The labels are not decorative. They are practical. But there is something pleasing about the rows of them, the consistency of the hand, the way they catch the candlelight and hold it for a moment before letting it go. The counter is dark wood, worn smooth at the edges where customers have rested their forearms over the years. Yours have worn it too. There is a small chip near the left corner. You know without looking, from an afternoon 3 winters ago when a crate of empty bottles got away from you. You never filled it in. Some marks, you've decided, are just the building remembering what it has seen. The candles are already lit. You must have lit them when you came in, though you don't quite remember doing it. That's the way of candles in the shop. They seem to tend themselves. Outside, the sky over Sable Street has gone the color of old pewter. Not dark yet, but the light is leaving. You can hear it leaving. The town quieting in the way it does at the end of a late autumn afternoon, when the market stalls have been packed away and the harbor sounds soften and the world seems to pull its coat a little tighter. The Harbour Bell has rung 5 times today. 5, and then the quarter hour after. You stop counting after that. Time in the shop moves by smell and warmth, not by bells. You set your basket on the table near the back window and begin to settle in. The back room is where the real work happens, though from the front of the shop you wouldn't know it. It looks small from the doorway. Low ceiling, one window facing the alley, a table of age-darkened wood that is always just slightly too cluttered to be tidy, and yet always just tidy enough to work at. There are bundles of dried herbs hanging from the ceiling beams. Lavender, and a fat rope of dried chamomile that has been there so long it has faded to the color of old parchment. There is rosemary and thyme and something darker that you harvested from the eastern edge of the brambleback in early September, still not entirely sure what it is, but drawn to it all the same. It smells faintly of rain and something deeper, something mineral and clean. You hang your coat on the hook by the back door. The hook is a little loose in the plaster. It has been for 2 years, but it holds. The coat settles against the wall, and you stand for a moment in your apron and your work clothes, just breathing. The small iron stove in the corner of the back room has been banked low all day, keeping the room from getting cold. You open the little door and add 2 pieces of wood from the stack against the wall. The wood catches quickly. You can hear it take. That small, satisfied sound of a fire deciding to grow. The light in the stove brightens and the warmth reaches you almost immediately, pressing gently against your shins and the backs of your hands. You close the stove door. You wash your hands at the basin. The water is cool and you dry them on the rough linen cloth that hangs on the nail beside it. And when your hands are dry, you stand at the center of the back room and consider what you'll do this evening. There is an order to fill. You have been meaning to fill it for several days, not because it is urgent. It isn't. Nothing in this shop is ever truly urgent, but because you have been looking forward to it. It is a personal commission from old Aldrich Vane, the cartographer in the ink quarter who comes every autumn asking for the same thing. A small bottle of focus tonic. 2 fingers deep, no more. He makes it last all winter, he says, using only a few drops at a time when a map needs particular attention. He is a precise man. You have always liked that about him. The recipe is one you know well. You've made it enough times that your hands remember it the way feet remember a path. But you also have something else in mind tonight. Something you've been thinking about since the weather turned and the first real cold came sliding down from the Grayvale Mountains last week. An idea for a new blend. Not a commission. Nothing to sell. Not yet. Just something you want to try. You'll do Aldrich's order first. Then the other thing, if there's time and the feeling is right. You reach for the first of the dried herbs. The focus tonic calls for 3 things, in this order. Starwort, which you keep in a tall amber bottle on the 3rd shelf from the top. Dried lemon peel, which you cut yourself from the fruit mare and sometimes brings back from the South Market in the next town over. And a small pinch of something you have always simply called the gray herb, because no one in Thistlewick seems to know its formal name and you have stopped asking. It grows along the upper part of Fenwick Lane, tucked against the stone walls where the sunlight hits best. You gather it in late summer, before the season turns. It smells, when fresh, like morning, like the hour just before sunrise, if that hour had a scent. You take the starwort bottle from the shelf with care. The glass is smooth and slightly warm from the candle on the shelf below it. You set it on the work table and uncork it, and the smell that rises is green and faintly astringent and good. The way good things often are, complex enough to be interesting, but not so much as to be confusing. You measure it into the small mortar by sight. You've done this enough times that your eyes are calibrated, the way a baker's hands learn the weight of flour without scales. Then you reach for the lemon peel. You keep it in a ceramic jar, glazed in the pale blue-green that you've always associated with the harbor on a clear summer morning. The lid fits snugly and makes a soft sound as you lift it, a small pop of suction, and then the clean, precise smell of dried citrus rising up to meet you. You add it to the mortar. The gray herb is in a twist of wax paper on the far right of the table, where you left it after yesterday's work. You unfold the paper carefully. The herb is dry enough to be feather light. You take a pinch and add it last. Then you begin to grind. The pestle is old. You didn't make it. It came with the shop, or rather, it came with the person who taught you the shop, who had it from the person before them, and so on back to a time when nobody could say with certainty where it began. It is heavy in your hand, heavier than you'd expect for its size, and it moves with a particular rhythm that you've learned to follow rather than lead. Slow circles, not too much pressure. Let the herbs come to the pestle rather than forcing them down. The sound is soft and repetitive. The smell changes as the herbs release. More complex now, the lemon peel brightening everything, the gray herb adding its quiet note beneath. You work slowly. You are in no hurry. The candle on the work table burns without flickering. The stove pops once, quietly, settling into its rhythm. From outside, somewhere on Sable Street, there is the distant sound of a shutter being closed for the evening. A wooden sound, purposeful and domestic. Then quiet again. You grind until the herbs are a fine, even powder. You know when they're done not by looking but by the smell, which shifts when the ingredients have truly mixed, less like 3 separate things and more like one. You stop. You set the pestle down on the little rest beside the mortar, which is a small crescent of worn stone that you have always found pleasing. Then you look at what you have made. A soft, pale green powder, fine as flour, catching the candlelight in a way that is difficult to describe precisely. Not quite luminous, but not luminous either. You tip it carefully into the glass flask, adding the water in a slow, steady stream. Water you drew this morning from the stone well in Market Square. which you've always preferred for the tinctures because it has a quality you can't name and have stopped trying to. Drawn water from the well simply works better in the potions. That's all. In Thistlewick, that's often all there is to say. You seal the flask. You set it in the warm spot on the top of the stove, away from direct heat, just close enough to encourage. Then you write out the label for Aldrich's bottle, the small, careful letters, the name of the tonic, the date, and you set that aside to affix later. You straighten. Your lower back is aware of itself in the way it always is after standing at the work table. You press one hand gently against it, and the small ache acknowledges you and stays where it is, which is fine. You're used to it. Then you go and put the kettle on. The kettle is an old thing, dented on one side in a way that doesn't affect its function at all, and has somehow become a defining feature of it, a way of knowing it in the dark. You fill it from the jug beside the basin and set it on the small trivet at the side of the stove. The water will take a while. It always does. You have arranged your evenings to accommodate this. While the water heats, you begin to think about the new blend. It started with a feeling more than an idea. The feeling of the first cold week, the one that always comes in late autumn, when the warmth of October has finally run out and the air from the mountains arrives with real intention behind it. That week is always the hardest, in a particular way. Not painful, just large. The year beginning to look back at itself. People in town moving differently, more slowly, more inward. You notice it in the shop. Customers standing a little longer at the counter before they go. Lingering. Not because they need anything else, but because they are not quite ready to step back out into the gray afternoon. What they need, you have been thinking, is not a focus tonic or a grief-ease tea or even the gentle sleep draft that has always sold well in the dark months. What they need is something that simply says, it is all right to be slow. It is all right for the year to turn. The dark is not a threat. It is just the night, and you know how to be in it. You don't have a name for this blend yet. That's fine. Names come later. You reach for a bundle of dried lavender and hold it gently in both hands, turning it in the candlelight. The smell is familiar enough to be almost invisible, the way old friends are sometimes invisible, so present they become part of the background of things. But if you concentrate, if you really settle into it, the lavender is there fully, floral and slightly sharp at the top, and then something deeper, something almost smoky at the base. An old smell, a slow smell. Yes, that at the center. Around it, you are thinking something with depth. Amber resin, maybe, which you keep in one of the dark blue bottles near the window. Amber resin smells like trees in summer, like warmth stored up and given back slowly. And below that, something grounding. Vetiver, perhaps. You have a little. You don't use it often because it is strong and tends to take over if you're not careful with it. You set the lavender down and go to find the amber resin. The dark blue bottles are on the shelf nearest the window, and as you reach for the right one, you notice the light has changed. It is properly evening now. The alley outside the window is in full shadow, and the cobblestones are just barely visible below. Wet, you can tell, though you didn't hear the rain begin. Sometimes Sable Street's alley is like that. The rain arrives without your noticing, quiet as a thought. You take the amber resin bottle down and uncork it, and the smell is exactly what you needed, warm and woody and slow, like something that has been keeping a promise for a very long time. The kettle begins to make its pre-boiling sound. Not a whistle yet, just a low, building hum, a warmth in the throat. You set the amber resin on the work table and go to make your tea. You make tea the same way every evening in the shop. It is not a ceremony, exactly, though it has the feeling of one. You take the squat earthenware pot from the shelf, the brown one with the chipped spout, which you use only for the shop evenings and not for the mornings, though you couldn't explain why this distinction matters. and you add the loose leaf blend that you keep in a small tin near the kettle. The blend is your own. You made a batch at the start of autumn, chamomile and a little dried mint, and a very small amount of the same gray herb from Fenwick Lane that goes into Aldrich's tonic. Just a few crumbled leaves. Enough to give the tea a quality you can feel more easily than describe. Something settling about it. Something that makes the room feel a bit smaller, in a good way. Like the walls coming gently in. You pour the water over the leaves. The steam rises in a soft column, and you hold your hands above it for a moment, not quite touching, just receiving the warmth. Then you wait. There is a small wooden stool in the back room, tucked under the work table, and you pull it out now and sit on it. It is not a comfortable stool. It is functional and honest about being functional. But sitting on it in the back room, with the stove warming the air and the tea steeping and the smell of the herbs still present from the grinding, is one of your favorite small things about this shop. This particular configuration of yourself in this particular space. The way it fits. You can hear the rain now that you're not doing anything else. It is falling somewhere beyond the alley, on the cobblestones of the street, on the wooden signs of the shops, on the shutters of the buildings above. A soft percussion, nothing dramatic. The particular sound of Thistlewick rain, which has its own quality compared to rain elsewhere. A little rounder, a little slower. The way the buildings seem to hold the sound and shape it before letting it go. Somewhere further, muffled by distance and weather, the Harbour Bell rings 6. You pour your tea. It is somewhere in the middle of the second cup that you hear the front door. Not a knock, exactly. More of a familiar rattle. The door on Sable Street has a particular way of announcing itself, a brief shudder in the frame before it opens, the result of the wood swelling in wet weather, which it does every autumn without fail. You've learned to hear the shudder as its own kind of greeting. The door, saying, someone is coming in. Someone who belongs here. You carry your tea through to the front room. Marin is closing the door behind her, pulling her coat straight with both hands in the automatic way she has. She is wearing her good gray coat, the one with the wide collar, and she has her brown scarf wound twice around her neck, and her cheeks are pink from the cold. She looks, as she almost always does, like she has just come from somewhere useful and is considering where next to be. She sees you, and her expression softens into a slight smile. It's coming down now, she said, gesturing vaguely backward at the door and the street beyond it. I heard it settle in. You replied, setting your mug on the counter. Come in, come in. Take your coat off. She does. She drapes it over the back of the tall stool at the counter. The visitor's stool. You think of it, though you've never called it that aloud. And she unwraps her scarf, though she keeps it loose around her shoulders like a shawl. She settles onto the stool and places both hands flat on the counter in the way she does when she is getting comfortable, when she plans to be here for a while. Tea, you offered. Please, she said, if you've got it on. Always. You went back through to the kettle and the pot and poured a second mug, the blue one, which you handed to her when you returned, and which she took in both hands and held against her sternum without drinking yet, just holding it the way people hold things that are warm when they've been out in the cold. She was quiet for a moment. Then, it smells good in here tonight. I've been working on something, you said. We're thinking about working on something. The thinking is the slower part. She nodded, as if this were a profound observation and not simply the truth about most things. Anything in particular? She asked. You leaned against the counter on your side, wrapping your own hands around your mug. I'm not sure yet. Something for this time of year. The dark coming in feeling. Marin considered this. She looked at the rows of bottles on the wall, reading them the way she sometimes did, not quickly, not with any particular purpose, just letting her eyes move through them. She'd been coming to this shop long enough to know most of the labels. You'd taught her a few things over the years, without ever formally meaning to. The dark coming in feeling, she repeated softly. I know that one. Most people do, you said. She was quiet again. The rain had settled into a steady, even sound on the street outside. You could hear it running down the drain pipe at the corner of the building. A smooth, continuous sound, like something being poured from a height into something deep. I came for the regular, she said finally. The sleep one. I finished my last bottle sometime last week, and I've been telling myself I'd come in, and then the rain started, and I kept finding reasons to stay indoors. The sleep draft, you said. Of course. You already knew which one she meant. She'd been using it every autumn for 3 years now, not every night, but on the nights when the mind has trouble letting go. A few drops in warm water before bed. She had told you once that it smelled like the inside of a linen cupboard in summer, and you'd thought about that description for a long time afterward. How many, you asked? Just the one bottle. I'll make it last. I have some ready, you told her. I made a batch last week. You went to the shelves and found the right bottle without needing to look. Second row from the bottom, green glass, fourth from the left. You brought it to the counter and set it between you. The liquid inside was pale gold, almost clear, the color of weak sunlight through thin curtains. Marin looked at it for a moment. Thank you, she said quietly. Always, you replied, which is what you always said, because it was always true. She tucked the bottle carefully into the inside pocket of her coat where it would be warm and safe, and then she stayed on the stool, which you expected. She rarely came into the shop and left again quickly, even when that was what she'd intended. The shop had a way of holding people a little longer than they planned. You've always thought this was simply the nature of the place, something in the warmth, or the smell, or the particular quiet of the room on a rainy evening. Not magic exactly, or not any more magic than a good fire is magic, or a soft chair, or the presence of someone who is glad to see you. Are you staying for a while? You asked. A little while, she said. If that's all right. More than all right, you said, and you meant it. You refilled both mugs and went back to the work table in the back room, leaving the connecting door open so you could talk. Marin stayed on her stool in the front, which she preferred. You'd noticed long ago that she liked to sit in the shop proper while you worked, as if it were a small form of theater she found restful. She didn't need to watch. The sounds were enough. The amber resin was where you'd left it. You uncorked it again and held it for a moment, reacquainting yourself with it, and then you reached for the lavender. This was the part you had been looking forward to, not the grinding, not the measuring, but the earlier part, the gathering of ingredients that are only potential, before they've been combined, when each one is still entirely itself. You held the lavender first, then the amber resin. Then you found the vetiver at the back of the shelf, a small, dark jar, earthenware rather than glass, because vetiver doesn't mind the dark and sometimes seems to prefer it. You set all three on the table in front of you and looked at them. What you were looking for wasn't a recipe. Not yet. You were looking for a feeling. Something about the combination that told you it was right before you'd even mixed it. An intuition that experienced makers trusted and newer ones were sometimes impatient with. It couldn't be taught directly. It had to be discovered. You picked up the lavender bundle and held it under your nose. Then the amber resin, just the open jar. Then you dipped one fingertip into the vetiver, just barely, enough to smell it without disturbing it, and brought it close. The three smells, held together in your hands, without mixing. And something about it, the way they sat together in the cool air of the back room, the lavender forward and familiar, the amber resin warm and generous behind it, the vetiver low and slow and patient as an old stone wall. Something about it was exactly right. From the front room, Marin's voice came through the open door, soft and unhurried. Do you need me to be quiet? She offered. No, you told her. The quiet is fine, but you don't have to keep it. I was thinking about the Greenvale Fair, she said. The one they're planning for the 1st of the month. Whether to go. I'll probably go, you said. I like the start of winter fair. The cold doesn't bother you? Not as much as it used to. You began to measure the lavender into the mortar. I think you get used to things as you stay in a place long enough. The cold starts to feel like part of it, not something added. There was a pause. That's a nice way to think about it, Marin said. Part of Thistlewick. The cold. Part of the whole thing. You smiled to yourself. Not visibly, just inwardly. Just the small warm feeling of being understood. You began to grind. The lavender took longer than the starwort. It was coarser, drier, and the purple flower heads needed to be worked down slowly or they became ragged rather than powdered. You'd learned patience with lavender years ago. It didn't respond well to force. From the street outside, there came the sound of someone passing. The click of footsteps on wet cobblestone. The particular rhythm of a person walking with intent, not hurrying but purposeful. They passed and were gone, and the sound of the rain settled back and behind them like water closing over a stone. Marin was telling you about the letter she'd gotten from her sister in Marrow Bay. Her sister's husband was taking up woodworking, she said. He'd made a chair. The chair was, apparently, a little uneven, which her sister had mentioned in a diplomatic way, but it was a chair and he'd made it himself, and that seemed to be the important part. I like that, you said, working the pestle gently around the mortar. Making something imperfect. Better than not making it, Marin agreed. An imperfect chair still holds you up. The lavender was becoming something finer, paler, releasing its scent as it broke down. The back room was filling with it quietly, layering over the existing smells of the shop rather than replacing them, just adding itself to what was already there. You added the amber resin next, a small amount, measured carefully. The amber resin came in 2 forms, and you kept both, the raw chunks and the powdered. You used the powdered tonight because it mixed more reliably. It was the color of dark honey, and it had a quality in your palm that was slightly tacky, slightly warm, as if it had been sitting in afternoon light. The smell as it hit the lavender was something you could have sat with for a long time. The lavender lifted. The amber resin deepened everything. Together they created a third thing. Not quite either of their individual smells, but something that carried both in it. The way a room carries the memory of the fire even after the fire has been banked. Something smells different, Marin said from the front room. I'm adding the second ingredient, you told her. A pause. It's nice, she said. Warm. Something warm. Amber resin. That's the one that comes from the southern forests? From trees that have been very old for a very long time. You agreed. I can believe that, she said. It smells old. In a good way. Like something that's been around longer than you have and isn't bothered about it. You smiled at that and kept grinding. The vetiver was last and the smallest amount. You measured it with particular care, a fraction of what you'd used for the other 2, which was often the way with vetiver. It was not the kind of ingredient that needed to be prominent. It needed to be present in the way that the floor of a room is present. You don't notice it, usually, but you would notice if it weren't there. You added it to the mortar and worked slowly. The smell changed again. The lavender amber warmth was still there, still dominant. You'd made sure of that, but beneath it now something grounded itself. Something that said, here, stay. The ground is still under you. The world is not floating. You are in a place, and the place is real, and it holds you. You stopped grinding and held the mortar near the candle. The powder was darker than Aldrich's focus tonic. Softer looking, a lavender gray color, touched at the edges with gold where the amber resin had worked in. It was not luminous the way some of the potions were, but it had a quality of depth, of something that went down rather than up. You stood very still with it for a moment. Yes, you thought. Yes, that's what this is. Marin, you said. Come and smell this. Tell me what you think." She came through the doorway, holding her mug carefully, and stood beside you at the work table. You held out the mortar, and she leaned over it and breathed in slowly. She was quiet for several seconds. "That's," she started and stopped. Then tried again. "That feels like the feeling of getting into bed," she said. "When you've been cold all day and you finally get in and the blankets close over you. You felt something settle inside you, the way a key settles into a lock." "Yes," you said. "That's what I was trying to make." She straightened and looked at you. There was something in her expression that you didn't often see there, something soft, a little open. "Have you made this before?" she asked. "Never," you said. "This is the first time." She was quiet again for a moment. Then she said, "You should bottle that. When it's ready. I'll need to work out the rest of it," you said. "The suspension. The ratio. Whether it comes in dry or liquid form." You set the mortar down carefully. "There's more work before it's anything someone can use. But the idea of it is already there," Marin said. "The idea is there," you agreed. She went back to her stool in the front room. You stood with the mortar for a little while longer, just letting the smell be around you. Then you covered it with a small cloth, loose, just resting over the top, and you washed your hands, and you went to see how the focus tonic was doing on the warm spot of the stove. The flask had changed color slightly. It was clearer now. The green-gray of the tonic deepened and settled, the liquid moving in tiny convection currents when you held it up to the candle. That was right. That was what it should do. You set it back on the warm spot and left it to finish. Marin was looking at the shelves again, reading the labels the way she sometimes did. "The clarity tonic," she said. "Does that work the way it sounds?" "For some people," you said. "For others, it does something different. Something more like making quiet where there was noise. Not exactly clarity, but related." "What's the difference?" You thought about it, leaning against the counter again. "Clarity points you somewhere. Quiet clears the path. Both useful, depending on what you need." She turned this over in the way she turned things over, unhurriedly, giving the thought the space it needed. "I think I usually need the quiet," she said. "My mind doesn't lack for direction. It just doesn't know when to stop." "Then you want the quiet," you agreed. "Though you've never asked for the clarity tonic, so I wonder if you've worked that out on your own already." She glanced at you with a slight expression that was close to amused. "Or I've never noticed I need it. Or that," you said. The rain had softened again, not quite stopping but settling lower, more patient. The Harbour Bell rang 7 from its tower on the docks, a distant sound, softened by the weather and the buildings between you and the harbor, but familiar enough to be reassuring. 7 in the evening in late autumn meant proper night now. The sky outside would be fully dark. The alley outside the window would be lit only by the light coming through the shop's small pane, that warm amber rectangle falling out onto the wet cobblestones below. You thought about whether you were hungry. You probably were. You'd eaten something at midday, something you'd brought in your basket from the bakery on your way past. But that was a long time ago now. "Are you hungry?" you asked. Marin tilted her head. "I could eat. There's something at the back. Fenwick's. I bought too much at midday. The spice bread they've been doing." Her expression shifted into something warmer. "The October spice bread. That's the one." "Yes, then. Please." You went to the back room and found the wrapped parcel in your basket, the dense autumn loaf, still faintly warm from having been near the stove all day, wrapped in wax paper that was slightly translucent with the bread's own oils. You brought it out and unwrapped it on the counter between you and Marin, and the smell that came from it was particular and good. Warm spice, something dark and sweet, the bread itself toasted along the bottom from the bakery's stone. You each took a piece. You ate standing at the counter, unhurried, not talking for a little while. The bread had the quality that Fenwick's bread always had, a density that wasn't heavy, a sweetness that wasn't cloying. The spices were something the family kept to themselves. You'd stopped trying to identify them years ago and learned to simply enjoy not knowing. Some things didn't need to be taken apart. Good, Marin said, with the contained satisfaction of someone who doesn't often say things just to fill silence. Always, you said. And you both stood there eating the bread on the counter of the potion shop, while the rain fell on Sable Street and the candles burned without flickering, and the Harbour Bell rang the 7:15 somewhere in the dark. Sometime later, Marin left. She put her coat back on and rewound her scarf and collected the sleep draft from her coat pocket to make sure it was still safe. It was stoppered and warm, and she stood in the doorway for a moment while you held it open against the wooden shutter of it. "Let me know how the new one comes along," she said. "I'll save you the first bottle," you told her. She nodded, satisfied, and then she was out into the street and the rain, her footsteps quiet on the cobblestone, and you stood in the open doorway for a moment longer, watching her go. The night air was cold against your face and arms. Not unpleasant. A clean cold. The kind that reminds you that the warmth behind you is real. You breathed it in once. What cobblestones? Rain. The faintest thread of wood smoke from somewhere further up the street. Then you stepped back inside, and the door rattled shut behind you. The shop was quiet in a different way now. Not empty. It never felt empty, exactly, but returned to itself. The visitor's stool was slightly different from how it usually sat, and you left it that way. There was a small warmth in the cup Marin had used, which you set near the basin without washing yet. You went back to the focus tonic. The flask had finished doing what it needed to do. The color was right, pale green and just a little translucent, holding the candlelight inside it in a contained way. You held it carefully and tipped it gently to watch the liquid move. Smooth. No sediment. Yes. You decanted it carefully into the small bottle you'd prepared for Aldrich, using the narrow glass funnel that hung on the hook above the work table. The liquid ran in a thin stream without losing anything. You sealed the bottle and affixed the label, Aldrich Vein, Focus Tonic, the date in your careful letters, and set it on the small shelf at the back where you kept finished orders. Aldrich would stop by when he was ready. He always did, in his own time, the way precise people often were about things that weren't maps. You stood back and looked at the completed bottle for a moment. There was a particular satisfaction in a thing made well and done. Not a loud satisfaction. Nothing in the shop was loud, but a settled one. The feeling of something going where it was meant to go. Then you looked at the covered mortar with the new blend in it. Tomorrow, you thought. Tomorrow you'd work on the suspension medium. Think about the water versus the oil base, whether this blend wanted to dissolve in water to be drunk or be carried in oil to be placed somewhere in the room, near a flame or on the pillow. You need to try both. That would take several evenings. That was fine. Good things usually did. You covered the mortar more carefully with a proper cloth and set it at the back of the work table where it wouldn't be disturbed. Then you stood in the quiet of the back room and let yourself be still for a moment. The stove was still warm, not burning high, but holding, the coals red-orange behind the grate, the cast iron radiating a deep and patient heat. The smell of the back room had settled into something layered and rich now. The lavender from the new blend, the citrus green of the focus tonic, the chamomile of the tea, and underneath all of it the baseline smell of the shop, beeswax and old wood, and something slightly sweet and dry that you have always attributed simply to time. To the years the shop has been a shop, and all the things that have been made and stored and given away in it. You went to wash the mugs. Washing up in the back room was a slow task done the way you liked it. Water from the jug that was still slightly warm from sitting near the stove all evening, the small bar of soap that smelled of nothing much, the cloth that was more satisfying to use than a fine cloth would be. You washed Marin's mug first, then your own, and the pot, and the small flask you'd used in the making of the tonic. You dried everything carefully and set it back in its place. The act of returning things to their places was one you had always found restorative, not in any grand way, just in the way that made the room feel correct when it was done. The right mug on the right hook, the flask in its place on the shelf, the mortar and pestle cleaned and resting, the pestle on its crescent of stone. You looked around the back room, everything where it should be. You turned down the lamp on the work table, not out, just lower, down to a warm glow rather than a working light. The room changed quality immediately. Softer, the shadows deeper, the candlelight on the bottles gentler. The back room at low light looked old in a comfortable way, like it had been here a very long time and was glad to still be standing. Which it had been, and it was. You went through to the front of the shop. The front room at night had its own character. The bottles on the shelves caught the candlelight differently when the room was dark outside. They seemed to hold more of it, to glow from inside rather than just reflect. You'd always found this particular to this shop. Other shops didn't do it. You'd asked, once, about it, and the answer had been one you'd understood but not quite been able to explain to anyone else. Something about the glass. Something about the intention in the making. The bottles were made with care by a glassblower in the ink quarter who had learned from his father, and the glass held that care in the way that old, well-loved things often held what had been put into them. You went and straightened the stool at the counter. Marin had tilted it slightly, and you put it back with a gentle nudge. Then you went around to the front of the shop and checked the door. It was latched. Of course it was. But you checked it anyway, the way you did every evening, because the checking was part of the closing, and the closing was part of the knowing that the day was done. You stood at the door for a moment and looked out the small pane of glass set into it. Sable Street was mostly dark. The wet cobblestones caught the light from the lantern across the way, a soft orange reflection pooling in the small hollows of the stones. A cat was sitting on the opposite doorstep, not moving, simply existing in the way cats do with a completeness that is almost philosophical. You watched it for a moment. It did not watch you back. It was occupied with something else entirely, some interior life you had no access to. The Harbour Bell rang 8. You turned away from the door. There was one more thing before you closed up properly. You'd almost forgotten, which was unusual, because you rarely forgot, but the small bundle of lemon balm you'd harvested from the pot in the back window needed to be tied and hung with the others before it got any further toward dryness. If it dried unbound, it would lose too many of the smaller leaves, which were the most useful part. You went back through and found it where you'd left it this morning, lying on the side of the work table near the window in a loose, comfortable arrangement that was not quite a bundle yet. You gathered it gently in one hand. The smell was different from the dried lemon peel in the jar, brighter, younger, carrying more of the green in it. Lemon balm fresh was almost entirely green smell with just the citrus underneath, where dried lemon peel was the reverse. You found both useful. They did different things. You tied it with the cotton twine you kept on the small spool above the table. The knot was simple and tight. Then you found the last open hook on the overhead beam. The beam was getting full now, which happened every autumn as you harvested and hung, and you hung the bundle there. It settled into its place among the others. The lavender, the chamomile, the dark-smelling herb from the bramble, the rosemary going silver at the tips, and now the lemon balm, bright and green and new. You stepped back and looked up at all of them in the low light. A whole summer's worth of gathering. A whole growing season, gathered and brought inside before the winter came. This was the work before the work, the harvesting and drying and preserving that made everything else possible. Nobody saw this part. Customers came in for the finished things, the bottles with the careful labels, the potions that tasted like clarity or grief ease or gentle sleep. But this was where those things lived first, before they were any of that. Just herbs on hooks. Just the smell of growing things, stored against the cold. You had always thought there was something important about that. About keeping the source close. You lowered the lamp in the back room the rest of the way and let the candle on the shelf take over. The one that had been burning all evening, steady and unhurried. The one that always seemed to go out at just the right time. The last tasks of the evening. You do them by feel as much as by sight at this point. The shop tells you what it needs. The stove needs to be banked, not out, never entirely out in autumn, but low, just enough to keep the cold from settling in the pipes and the mortar and the jars overnight. You add one more piece of wood, a small one, and close the grate halfway. The fire pulls down into a steady, patient glow. It will still be there in the morning. It always is. The candles in the front room you snuff one by one, starting from the back and moving to the front. Each one goes out with a small thread of smoke that rises and disperses, and the room changes with each light removed, growing quieter by degrees. Not dark yet. The candle on the counter nearest the door you leave burning, always, which is a habit you formed years ago and have not questioned since. Some habits are simply correct without needing justification. You take your apron off and fold it on the counter. You take your coat from the hook in the back and put it on, and the familiar weight of it settles over your shoulders in the familiar way. The coat is thick enough that you feel the outside cold retreating before you've even stepped through the door. That's the thing about a good coat. It starts working immediately. You pick up your basket, which is lighter now. The bread parcel gone, the mortar work done, the order completed and on the shelf. Then you stand in the front room for just a moment. The shop is the same as it always is at the end of the day. Warm and smelling of itself and complete. The bottles on the shelves hold the last candle's light. The counter is clean. The visitor's stool is in its place. Everything exactly as it should be. You let yourself have that for a moment. The quiet rightness of it. Then you go to the door. You check the latched, and you open it, and the night air comes in, cool and damp and smelling of rain on stone, and, faintly, from somewhere further toward the harbor, wood smoke. A low cloud of it, moving through the town at this hour, warm and domestic. You step out onto Sable Street. The rain has stopped, some time in the past hour, and the cobblestones are wet and dark beneath the lanterns. Your breath makes a small soft cloud and disperses. The street is quiet. One or two lights in windows above, warm behind curtains. The sound, distant, of something at the harbor, a rope, perhaps, or a boat against its mooring. Something slow and rhythmic and untroubled. You pull the door shut behind you and hear the latch engage. Then you stand for a moment on the step. The Harbour Bell does not ring. You must be between hours. The night is simply itself, dark and cold and quiet, and full of the ordinary sounds of a town that is settling toward sleep. Somewhere on the far side of Market Square, a cat, possibly Bindle, from the library, though Bindle is not supposed to be out this late, moves through a pool of lantern light and disappears between buildings. The old oak in the square, though you can't see it from here, is out there in the dark, standing as it always does, holding its ground. You breathe in the night air once more. Salt, stone, wood smoke. Rain just passed. The faint echo of what you've been working on all evening, lavender and amber and something deep and grounding, still in your clothes, in your hands, in the small warm space of your lungs. You begin to walk home. The walk is not long. It never is, in Thistlewick. Everything is the right distance from everything else, close enough to feel like a neighborhood, far enough that arriving somewhere feels like arriving. You take the way you always take in the evenings, past the chandlery and its window of candles at rest, past the narrow gap between the chandlery and the bookshop where the rain has left a small rivulet still running in the gutter, past the corner where the market square opens up, and you can see the oak in the center, very dark against the slightly lighter dark of the sky. You look at it as you pass. It looks back, in the way it does, in the way that isn't looking exactly, but is something that nobody in Thistlewick has found a better word for. Then you're past the square and onto the lane that runs toward home, and the sounds of the harbor fade to one side while the sounds of the upper lanes, wind in the hedge tops, the creak of a gate somewhere further up the hill, take over instead. The third step on the Fenwick path, as you pass it, gives its familiar small sound. You know it without expecting it. It is the sound of a known thing doing the thing it always does, and it is, in its way, a comfort. You don't stop. You keep walking. The lamp over your door is already lit. Something you arranged in the morning so that you'd never come home to a dark entrance, and its warm light reaches down the path toward you as you come closer. You walk into it. The light is orange and steady, without wind to move it, just resting in its glass. You find your key. You put it in the lock. The door opens, and the warmth of your home comes out to meet you like a welcome. You step inside. The house at this hour is the way you like it best. The banked fire in the main room. You'd left it low this morning, and it had come down to embers, but enough heat remains in the hearthstone that the room has not gone cold. You add wood without ceremony, just 2 pieces, and the fire decides to come back without much persuasion. A warm sound, a rising warmth. You set your basket by the door. You hang your coat. The kettle goes on automatically, because your body has decided that this is what comes next, and your body is not wrong. Something simple, just the chamomile and mint from the tin, nothing added. The evening has been full and good, and you don't need anything more complex than something warm and quiet to end it. While the water heats, you sit in the chair by the window that looks out toward the lower town. The glass is cold and slightly fogged on the inside. You can see the lane below, empty, and beyond it the rooftops stepping down toward the harbor, and where the harbor meets the sky a faint distinction of dark water against dark sky that is only visible when you know where to look. You know where to look. A light is moving out there, slow, steady, far enough out on the water that you can't hear anything connected to it. A boat, heading in or heading somewhere. It doesn't matter which. It is simply another thing that moves through the night at its own pace and for its own reasons. And there is something very peaceful about watching it at this distance, where you can receive it without needing to understand it. The kettle sounds. You make your tea. In the chair again, with the mug warm between both hands, you think about the new blend. The lavender-amber vetiver combination. The way it smelled when Marin leaned over the mortar and breathed in and said it felt like getting into bed after being cold all day. You turn that description over in your mind. It is a good description, a useful one. It tells you something about what the blend is doing or what it will do if you can figure out the rest of it. It needs a medium, something to carry it, to make it usable. The liquid option would be the simplest, dissolved in water, a few drops in a bath or a cup before bed. But you keep thinking about the oil, about something that could be warmed near a candle, something that would fill a room slowly with the smell without anyone having to drink it or do anything active with it. Just set it nearby. Just let it work. The small clay dishes with the wax. You have a few in the shop, plain ones, the kind used for diffusing scent near heat. They're simple to make. Not what the shop is known for, but not wrong. Just different. You need to test the ratios. Try it in oil first. Find the proportion of vetiver that still grounds without dominating. Try a small sample. See how it changes when warmed. See if it does what you want it to do. You think about who might need it before you've even worked out how to make it properly. Old Aldrich, perhaps, though he has always said he sleeps well once a map is finished. Bramble Oast at the inn. He sometimes has guests who struggle to sleep. He's mentioned it before, the strangeness of sleeping somewhere unfamiliar, and a room scent might be gentler than a tonic for that particular thing. The Greenmere family might be interested, too. They had a third child this summer, and you imagine sleep is a complicated subject in that household right now. And Marin, who you'll save the first bottle for. The fire has settled back into its rhythm now. Solid and slow, the way fires are when they've decided to stay a while. The light it throws over the room is orange and slightly gold, touching the spines of the books on the low shelf by the door, catching the curve of the kettle still on its hook, finding the glass of water on the table by your chair, and holding in it for a moment like a small collected warmth. You are tired in the way that is not an uncomfortable tiredness, the kind that comes from a day well spent and an evening well used. Your hands are clean and faintly dry from the evening's washing. Your shoulders are aware of themselves, pleasantly so. Your feet are, for the first time in hours, not bearing your weight. Outside, the night has deepened. You can't see the harbor light from this angle now. You don't need to. The fire speaks quietly. The rain has not returned, but might. There's a quality to the silence that suggests it hasn't entirely decided. You don't mind. You'll be inside either way. You think about the morning, what order the day might take, whether you'll walk to the bramble on the way in, to look for anything the season has left at the edges of the path. Certain things are still findable in late autumn if you know where to look, particularly the gray herb from the stone walls, which sometimes offers a last small handful before the frost takes it. You'd like more of it. You'd like to keep your stock sufficient through the winter. Or you might stop at Fenwick's first. The rye loaf, if there is one. Or both, in the right order. It doesn't require deciding now. You let the thought settle and go soft. The firelight moves in the way firelight moves, not chaotically, but with a gentle, unpatterned rhythm that the eye can follow or release. You release it. You let your gaze soften, and the light becomes simply light. Warmth becomes simply warmth. The sound of the fire becomes simply the sound of the fire. The harbor bell rings somewhere distant. You count without meaning to. 9. The sound dissipates over the water and the rooftops and the stone and comes to you last of all, softened by all of that distance. Just a low resonance in the quiet. You shift in the chair. The wool blanket that lives over its arm is where it always is, and you pull it forward without getting up, just reaching, and it settles over your lap with the familiar weight of it. It is an old blanket, soft in the particular way that old wool gets, not as it was when it was new, but softer, warmer, more yielding, more itself. You keep both hands around the mug, though the mug is nearly empty now. The smell of the tea, even nearly empty, is still present. Chamomile and mint, with that thread of the gray herb underneath. That morning quality, that clean still scent that you sometimes associate, without quite knowing why, with the hour just before things begin. The hour when everything is possible, when the day has not yet committed to anything. Not the morning now, of course. The evening, late, deepening. But the smell carries that possibility anyway. The sense that there is something to look forward to, without needing to know what it is. The new blend. The morning walk. Aldrich stopping in to collect his tonic. Some unhurried morning or afternoon, probably without announcing himself, the way he did. Marin, sometime, with another reason to stop in. The Greenvale Fair, if the weather stays reasonable. All of it waiting in its small, ordinary way. Nothing urgent. Everything fine. You are safe. The fire speaks once more, a low, comfortable sound. The wood settling. The coals making their slow adjustments. The whole careful architecture of warmth arranging itself to last through the night. You set the empty mug on the table. You pull the blanket a little further. The room is warm and dark except for the fire, and the fire is warm and low, and the night outside is doing what the night always does in Thistlewick in late autumn, holding the town gently, keeping the fog off the harbor. Letting the smoke from the chimneys rise and drift and disperse over the rooftops and the old oak and the cobblestone streets that are probably wet and dark and very still now, with no one out on them but the occasional cat. You close your eyes. The smell of lavender is still faintly there, in your clothes, in the air, in the memory of the evening's work. And beneath it, amber. And beneath that, something deep and slow and patient. Vetiver, you think, without thinking. Something that says, here, stay. The ground is still under you. The place is real. It holds you.